As we head out of spring, it's time to begin looking at our onions to see whether they're ready to harvest. Now, you can often look for some signs that will show you it is that time. So looking here, you can see that our white onions or our yellow onions are actually upright still. However, the shoulders are starting to show of those bulbs. So that gives you a little bit of an inclination of the size that those bulbs might be. Also, if you look at our red onions back here, you can see they've sort of flopped over. Another sign might be that they start to bloom. A lot of times if our weather has kind of been back and forth, you might start seeing some flower spikes come up, and that is a for sure sign that you want to go ahead and begin to harvest your onions. Now, there's a couple of ways to do this depending on your soil. You can either kind of gently remove them with your hand just by giving them a little tug, or depending on your soil, again, if it's a little bit denser, you might just get a trowel and kind of lift those onions up out of the ground. Now, when you harvest them, you can eat them right out of the garden just like this. You could take this into the kitchen, go ahead and wash it, pull off some of this outer foliage and stuff and chop it up, take the roots off and eat it right away. However, a lot of times recipes don't call for all of the onions that you might be harvesting. So in that case, you want to go ahead and cure some of these onions. And what we're going to do as we harvest these, we're going to lift them up out of the ground. And if you are going to store these long term, you do not want to wash them. You might just give them a little shake and get some of that soil off. But what we're going to do is just put these into a warm, dry location where this outer vegetation, this kind of papery covering on the bulb can actually sort of dry out, and that will be the protective coating as you store it. So we're not going to chop any of the vegetation off. We're going to leave the roots. Those roots will actually dry up a little bit more. We have a drying screen right down here that we're going to put these on as we harvest them. So we'll just lay these out. Now, we aren't going to leave this screen out in this full sun. We're actually going to put it towards a shadier location, but I've just got it here so that I can lay our onions as we harvest them. So it's been a week. We now have dried onions. Basically, they have been laying out here on this drying rack for about 7 days. Usually it'll take anywhere from 7 to 10 days depending on your particular location and also your weather during that period. You can see some of them still have some green stems to them, but for the most part, most of them, the foliage has dried down, but the necks are still kind of supple and have a little bit of give to them, and that's what we're looking for in order to be able to braid or string them, that I'm going to show you how to do here in a second. Now, before we get to that, we're going to kind of sort through our onions because there are some onions that should be used sooner, some that are more appropriate for stringing and braiding, and some you're probably just better off putting them in a basket on your counter until you're ready to use them. So a couple examples here we have. You know, sometimes onions go ahead and start blooming, and this is an example of that. You can see this was the flower stalk here, the stem of that flower, and they're usually a lot thicker than the vegetation. So you can see the vegetation's already dried down, but this is here. And you want to make sure to use those onions first, because what happens is that actual stem starts to split your bulb. So the onion bulb is still good to use, but again, something that you don't want to store long term. So that's one that we're going to go ahead and put in our kitchen right away. Another one that's probably not good for storing is something that looks like this. This one's probably not good for braiding really because of the long bulb shape that it has. Again, it just doesn't have a nice round bulb with a thin neck. So we're not going to braid this one as well. And then a couple examples, you know, you always have a few smaller onions, something like this that maybe as it dried down really lost that neck. So there's nothing really to even braid on this one. And then here we have kind of a really large bulb, but again, the vegetation, and you can kind of feel that neck when you press it down. There's really not much to that. And so I'm afraid because of the weight of the bulb and how much vegetation, it's sort of a weak point right there, that we wouldn't want to braid that because it would quickly kind of fall out of that braid at this point. So those are a couple of examples of ones that you probably want to go ahead and sort out and save those for later. Now at this point, what we're going to do is clean our onions too. So regardless of whether you're putting them in a basket or if you're braiding them or stringing them, you don't want to have all of this vegetation in your kitchen because it can kind of be messy later on. So what we're going to do is go ahead and start trimming the roots first of all. And so we're just going to take these back a little bit to that just a little bit to the closer part of the bulb there, which is called the basal plate, where the vegetation meets the roots. So we're going to trim that off, and we'll do this on all of these as we go through this. The other thing you want to do when you're cleaning your onions is also go ahead and remove some of that outer peeling. So we're going to go ahead and clean those off. We are not washing any of these onions because that can lead to mold and mildew. We're just cleaning them up as much as possible with our hands and going ahead and removing a little bit of the necks on the ones that you're just storing in a basket. We're going to go ahead and save the necks on our other ones. And when I trim these off, what I'm doing is I'm just trimming a little bit above the bulb. So this, as it shrinks down, it dries more, it'll shrink down and kind of create an envelope to close that up even more. So we've got all of our smaller onions ready to go into the kitchen just on the tray. And these larger ones, you'll notice that I haven't really cleaned up the vegetation too much. And that's because I'm going to braid them or string them. I'm going to show two different options here. So we've left the whole vegetative stem on these, and what we've got here behind me, it's nice to be able to have a kind of a string that's hanging somewhere to be able to work on this. So it's about a 3-foot string that I've just tied with a square knot, and we're going to make a loop. So we're basically just going to take our string, twist it, we've got a loop there, and then we're going to pull that loop up. So you can see we've got a double loop. We're going to put our vegetation through that string and make sure it's secure down around the neck of that, and then pull it tight as we work it down. So it'll just kind of hang just like that. And we're going to fold our vegetation over to make kind of a hook there. So at this point, what we're going to do is just kind of keep working up our string. And again, you're going to put one on there. And then what you're going to do is kind of work that vegetation back through it and kind of curl it over. And so that locks it in place. And we're starting with our smaller onion, or excuse me, we're starting with our larger onions and working our way up. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and stop adding more to this string of onions because it's actually getting pretty heavy. And so that's one of the important things, is getting a good area to start this process somewhere secure. Now you can see we've got plenty of that vegetation still hanging out. If you want at this point to go ahead and trim it outside of those bulbs, that's great, so you don't have to worry about that falling off in your house. But some people like kind of that raffia look as it hangs through there. So it's your personal choice. Now if you want to take this off of this hook, and then you just go and hang it maybe in like a cool dark cellar or in your pantry somewhere. It really works with the tension of hanging, so you want to make sure you are hanging it, and again that just allows for good airflow to continue storing these, but don't try to store them in too much light if possible. Now the other thing is, when you're time to harvest actually out of these for cooking, what you'll do is just come in here with some scissors and basically just cut the stems off and be able to take whichever onion you want at that point. Now we have one more method on braiding onions, and if you want to join me on YouTube or Facebook, you can learn how to braid your onions in order to store them also. We hope you enjoyed this video as part of our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. You can also find even more videos on the OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.